Washington, D.C., and its allies in the liberal mainstream media have a robot army. They have been deploying this force across the United States for years with virtual impunity. It operates silently, in the shadows, undetected, but in today's video I'm going to reveal it for you. And once you realize who it is, you'll realize it has a weakness. Many have said, Florida Maquis, aren't you guys down in Florida a little afraid that if you keep bucking the system, they're going to send their magical robot army down to defeat you and put you back in line? No, Florida's not afraid. Because Florida has figured out the weakness of this robot army. To get there, we have to start someplace else. I'd like to give a shout out to two of my favorite people on the internet ever. Nicole Arbour on the left and JP Sears on the right. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Nicole Arbour. She's a comedian, she's an actress, she's a model, choreographer. Both her and JP Sears got something right, very right, early on, and it has now come to pass about what's gone on in the last 2 years. JP Sears has a channel on YouTube called Awaken with JP, and they're both comedians, absolutely hilarious, not afraid to hurt your feelings. They are equal opportunity offenders, that's for sure. Nicole Arbour wrote on her Instagram recently, "So when do we admit Florida was right the whole time?" Now, at virtually the same time, JP Sears wrote a paragraph or two that details something we covered here at the Florida Maquis in a video about a week ago. See, it's the reason Florida was right the whole time. JP Sears writes, "I don't like abusers." Those who would take issue with that statement would say, "But Fauci is the nation's top infectious disease expert. He hasn't abused anyone." Two things on that. He has likely contributed to more people in this nation getting infected by a disease than anybody else. So in a sense, I agree, JP Sears speaking here, he is the nation's top infectious disease expert. But here's where JP Sears really gets it right. And this is why Nicole Arbour is relevant in this, because she has lived this. Here's a fun fact. Abusers never approach their victims saying, "Hi, I'm an abuser and I'm here to abuse you." Sorry to burst your bubble, but that's not how it happens. They approach their victims by trying to position themselves into a role of trust while deceiving their victims that they are here to benefit them. "This is our special time. Come down to the basement for ice cream. I'm doing it because I love you," etc. If you choose not to trust yourself, you will trust abusers more than yourself, and you will be abused in one form or another. When you call an abuser out, his other victims that still trust him more than they trust themselves will run to his or her defense, calling you crazy or even trying to hurt you. This is called Stockholm Syndrome. Something else we have talked about at this channel extensively. If you don't know what it is, you probably have it. Look it up and free yourself. As a wise man once said, you can't get out of a jail you don't know you're in. Stockholm Syndrome. Psychological coping mechanism in which victims of abuse begin to feel sympathy, emotional bonding, and solidarity for abusers. Victims are in a constant numbness, separating from a part of themselves, continually strategizing to emotionally survive by focusing on abuser's kindness rather than his or her brutality. This explains why domestic violence victims choose to stay with a man or woman who violently hurts them and his or her children. See, you're not going to get this until you've lived it. You're not going to get or understand the effectiveness of this until you've lived it. Now, the video that I'm talking about, I put together a meme. I took a meme from the internet and I added some images to it to show what's really going on with DC, agreeing to lift this lockdown, that lockdown, this other lockdown. and then offer liberty. And those who worship Washington, D.C., those who worship top-down government, those who think the president is the chief governor and the governors of all the states are just assistant presidents, they're all happy and excited about the liberty that was unconstitutionally taken away from them being given back to them. This is exactly how those in abusive relationships react. Now, I'll give you a link to that video. It's here. It's called Now Do You See It? The 12 Undeniable Signs DC has in common with this domestic act. The 12 signs of coercive control. You see, in reality, there are those who have had enough. And they're leaving places where they feel abused. California shrank by 165,000 taxpayers, taking $8.8 billion in gross income away from that state. Guess where most of it's going? Yep, the South. Texas, Florida, South Carolina. But to really hammer this home, I did a live yesterday with the governor of Florida, and he absolutely reinforces this entire idea in about a 3-minute section answering a question from a reporter. And I would like you to hear this in his own words. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Does this sound like a man who is afraid of Washington, D.C.?
Yes, ma'am.
Governor, Megan Moriarty with Action News. Question for you. You mentioned that, Florida went with freedom versus Fauci, and right now the big debate, cruise ships. Right now, the CDC is asking that for anyone to go on a cruise ship, they want 95%.
They're not asking. Let me just be honest with you. What the CDC is doing, this is why we sued them. The CDC closed cruise ships for 2 weeks, they claim, last March, and they're still closed. They will issue these fiats. It has no basis in science and certainly no legislative authority for them to be doing this. So they did a conditional sail order in October, and you physically couldn't sail a ship under those conditions. And so we are making no progress. So what we did in Florida, we sued the federal government and we sued CDC to liberate the cruise ships from, basically this is just an administrative overreach. But the cruise ships are in a tough spot because the CDC, they may have a role about, enforcing certain things if there's an outbreak or whatever. I don't really know how far that authority extends. I know the authority doesn't extend to mothballing the industry for 15 months. And I know the authority doesn't extend to imposing effectively legislative requirements. And so I think we're going to win the case in district court. There was a mediation attempt. We were basically saying, honestly, just let them sail. Fine. But they're very unreasonable at DOJ. They believe, so the kids aren't permitted to be vaccinated under the EUA, and they're at such little risk. Most parents are going to decide not to do that because you don't know what the potential problems are going to be. But CDC says that you have to have 95% have to be vaccinated. That means you cannot have families going on these. And so they're issuing those dictates. And so if we win the case, it opens up. They will all sail out of Florida. They will all do it consistent with Florida law. We are not worried about that in any way, shape, or form. But just understand, this bureaucracy needs to be brought to account. You can't have a bureaucracy that's just going out and issuing these rules on the fly. They literally said, if you're sunbathing on a cruise ship, you have to wear a mask. Really? I mean, give me a break. And I think now with Fauci's emails, and you see all this stuff, it's pretty clear that a lot of this stuff was fly by the seat of your pants guidance. This was not based on hard data. In fact, there were people who were pointing out about that this thing came from the lab. If you said that a year ago, corporate media said you were a conspiracy theorist. Facebook would deplatform you for saying that. Now, it's almost impossible to make the case it was natural because they haven't been able to do any linkage, and it's 15 months plus later. And so the lab leak is by far the most plausible explanation. And so we just have to ask ourselves, why was Fauci and these other people sending grants to Wuhan or some of these other places? I'm sorry, that is not an appropriate use of tax dollar money. And when he testified many years ago that doing gain-of-function research, the risk of having a pandemic is worth doing the research, I disagree with that. I think this has been a disaster what's happened, and China has covered it up. They need to be held accountable, but the bureaucrats in the United States also need to be accountable for what they did.
Let me illuminate what you just saw. That was Florida making the case for divorce. Let me say that again. Washington, D.C. has been the abusive spouse. And Florida is going before a judge saying, this is the basis upon which they need to be held to account for their abuse, and we want a divorce. This is that moment. Many people don't see it that way, but when you put everything together, the Stockholm Syndrome, the abuse, the reason for the abuse, and why Florida did it so differently, this is exactly the same analog as an abused spouse having enough and saying, that's it, I'm done, I'm breaking free of Stockholm Syndrome, and we're leaving. We're done. The rest, whatever. That's why I talked about California. See, there are people leaving there, but the state itself is still living in a state of Stockholm Syndrome, like many states are. Even conservative states. This is an article about the governor of South Dakota just throwing up her hands and going, oh, woe is me. Oh, the court said we can't have fireworks, so I guess we can't. Because D.C. said we couldn't. Try that in Florida. See what happens. D.C. knows better. They would never try this crap in Florida because they know we do it anyway. If Kristi Noem were smart, she would have them as a state function, not a federal function, and defy them to try to come in and stop her. But South Dakota is still living the life of an abused spouse in Stockholm Syndrome. Now, some have said, wait a minute, Maki, I get all that, but you said something about a robot army. Who is this robot army and how can you defeat them? You are the robot army. Every time you go to the internet, you cancel somebody, or you tear somebody down, or you participate in Twitter, or you participate in that aspect of Facebook, you are acting as a soldier in the robot army of the mainstream media and DC. They control all of this. That's why every time DC or the mainstream media said XYZ is the case, Florida didn't even accept the premise of it. Didn't even accept the argument of it. We no longer give it weight. And this is why we're going to be able to hold the abusers at Twitter, Facebook, to account. Which is why we've passed laws saying we can sue them. Now, I think it could have been done a little bit differently than what it was, but I'm not the governor. And I'm also not the people of the state of Florida. I am a person on YouTube. But my opinion does not supersede or overweight the opinions of the people of the state of Florida that are evidenced by the actions of our legislature and Senate and courts and governor. There's no such thing as a conservative activist. There's no such thing as a conservative activist. The two things are antithetical to each other. It doesn't matter what the topic is. If you're participating in cancel culture, you are working with DC's robot army. And very recently, Miss Arbor put up a video delineating this. It doesn't matter the reason you disagree with somebody or don't like them. If you're participating in it, you are more of a problem than that person's particular thing you disagree with is. This has to go away by simply not participating. Watching a YouTube video is not participating in social media. It's gaining information and gaining insight. Facebook and Twitter, that's an entirely different thing. That's a whole bunch of people arguing over nonsense just for the simple joy of it or whatever they get out of it. Very different platforms. You don't need to be creative. You don't need to be a creator to be on Facebook or be on Twitter. That's why some people said, Maki, you're on YouTube. How can you, say this stuff? Because it's a very different thing. It's a very, very different thing. My success or failure depends on you guys. You come watch. I get a lot of views. If you like what I put out, I'll get a lot of subscribers. If not, the opposite will be true. Opinions don't matter. I can talk about Antarctica. I can talk about Venezuela. I can talk about psychological operations. I can talk about my other favorite YouTubers. I can talk about what we do at Twitch. At night, we're playing a game called Subnautica Below Zero. That's exploring basically a planet like Antarctica. It's pretty cool. I wish I would have brought up the link so I could share it with you, but anyway, just wanted to share this with you that we can fix this. We can fix this. It's not hard. Stop participating. Get out of the robot army. I'll leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe. We will see you tonight at twitch.tv/Florida Maki. Like I said, survival game, mystery game, takes place on a planet where you've crashed and you've got a little pod and you've got to collect resources and survive, and there's a mystery you've got to solve. It's very cool. So anyway, hope you have a great weekend. We will see you next time.